in the 1960s, if we went to the 1970s and 80s, the 1990s, perhaps in another 17 years, our government officials will see the wisdom of ceasing and desisting in the tyranny that they're oppressing us with. I don't need 300,000 or 30,000, just need 300 good men. Now, in our local area, we're prepared to do whatever it takes, whatever is required. But don't ever allow yourself to get backed into a corner. Now, there's been a couple of mistakes made. Now, let me illustrate these two mistakes. One, I'll never give you my fingerprints. That's an error. What you should do is say, well, I'll gladly give you my fingerprints if you'll obey the law, officer. What I want you to do is to get a court order pursuant to Davis versus Mississippi. Now, if 3 days later you decide you want out of jail and you do voluntarily give your prints, and we've had a couple of 3 people go out there to the jail, and we find that when they're really faced with those 14-foot-tall anakims, they melt like jellyfish in the hot sun. That sends the wrong signal to our public servants, because now when you go out there, they'll do the same thing to you. You just need to do it 2 or 3 times correctly. But you'll have to do it 10 times if you do it 2 or 3 times incorrectly, because it sends the wrong signal. And another mistake is, if you think that ultimately you're going to sign and fill out the form because you've been in jail for a day or 3 days or 6 days or whatever, then it would be better if you signed the form before you went to jail, wouldn't it? Because going to jail isn't going to accomplish anything. You've lost a tactical victory and you've suffered a tactical defeat. When your government says, you're going to do this, and if you don't do this, I'm going to throw you in the fiery furnace. I'm going to throw you in jail if you don't do this. Now, they're nowhere as near as nasty today as they were in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, but you can see the parallel is exactly the same. If you're going to say, well, we're not going to fall down and worship your God, Nebuchadnezzar, and then, as they're about to be thrown into the fiery furnace, well, okay, wait a minute, hold it. I can see the wisdom of your argument now, Mr. Nebuchadnezzar. I think what we better do is to change our religious beliefs now. If you do that, what it's going to do is send the wrong signal to everybody in government, and it would have sent the wrong signal to Nebuchadnezzar. At least one thing came out of the Nebuchadnezzar story, and that is, those 3 guys not only didn't die, they came out and said, well, now you can see with your own eyeballs. Now Nebuchadnezzar, the public servant, said, wow, I can't believe you guys. Yeah, I see this, and I'm going to change. And so those 3 fellows made a significant change based upon their beliefs and their character and their resolve. They absolutely would not fall down and worship the king's idol. Now, if you think that you might do that, well then what you need to do is to go over here with the other 32,000, and let's move you over here. And for those few of you that can come over here and do this sort of thing, you're the man or you're the woman that I want to talk to, because you're the people that can make that significant, meaningful change. The writ of habeas corpus is an outstanding example of what we're going to use now in the Rick Mitchell case. You have 5 opportunities to remove him from that jail, and to do so through due process. And here's what they are. The man has been sentenced and he's been sent off to jail. First thing that your little group does is they say, okay, now we need a writ of habeas corpus, and you file that with your district court. You want to bring the man up on a writ, because remember, once you've been thrown into the fiery furnace, it's difficult to write briefs and motions down there. You need someone on the outside, because while it may not be burning your body, it will probably burn up your paper. So you get someone on the outside, and we have a computer here, and we sit here, and we've got plenty of examples to go by. We have witnesses who were in court, and so we write a writ of habeas corpus and file it with the district court. That gives that man an opportunity to come before the district court and say, well, why have you imprisoned me? What evil have I done? Am I a wicked and violent man? Have I killed and robbed and stolen and taken or given usury? I have said that I will not serve your gods, nor will I serve or bow down to your tyranny. I demand due process, and I demand my constitutional rights. Now, here's a district court judge who's on the same level as the judge who put him in jail, and so he sits there and he goes, uh-oh, if I let this guy out, well then my colleague, this other judge over here, might overrule some of my decisions, so therefore I'm going to leave him in jail. So there's a district court judge and he leaves you in jail. But that's the no that you needed. Now you take that to your state Supreme Court. That's what we did next. Now we took it over to our state Supreme Court. Now ordinarily the state Supreme Court here in Idaho can act on a writ of habeas corpus in 3 or 4 days. They've done it in the past in 3 or 4 days. But we noted on the 9th day, I went over and I talked to the court clerk, and he was surprised that the Supreme Court of Idaho had not at least said, no, stay in jail, dummy. Or, yes, come before us and tell us your story. You see, it would be easy for them to just say, well, no, the district court has said that they need to be able to have the power to enforce their rulings and their orders. You disobeyed their ruling and order, and so in Idaho, we're going to leave you in jail until you fill out that form, Rick. But we noted that in Idaho, our Supreme Court didn't want to give us an answer, so they ignored it. Oh, okay. That is very significant, friend, because when your state Supreme Court doesn't want to address the issue, it tells you plainly they're afraid of it. On the one hand, if they just leave him in jail, they're violating his rights, hoping against hope that ultimately he will capitulate and sign. And then, if they let him out on a writ of habeas corpus, that is of and by itself the prima facie evidence that the Supreme Court of the state of Idaho recognizes false arrest and false imprisonment. And they can't do that, can they? So what do? Well, you're either going to let him out, you're going to keep him in, or you're going to ignore him. All 3 of those alternatives are unacceptable to our state Supreme Court. Now, do you see what you've done, what we've done? We sit here and we say, okay, how long will you punish this man who is not even a criminal? And what happens when we fill up all of our beds here in Ada County? There's 156 beds out in our county jail. If we fill the 156 beds, where are you going to put the rapists, robbers, and pillagers, friends? What are you going to do with those? Somewhere between 1 and 156, when we fill that jail, they're going to have to turn somebody loose, aren't they? And the moment they do that, there's the prima facie evidence of false arrest and false imprisonment, and now you take the Title 42 action up to the federal district court. And if we take 20 of those types of actions in front of 20 juries, friends, I think we'll win 1 accidentally. I think 1 jury out of 20 is going to come in our side. And if that happens and you've got $1 million or $1.5 million lawsuit, I think that's going to send a message to the insurance underwriters that will be unmistakable, a shot that will be heard around the corporate headquarters of Mutual of Omaha that they won't forget for a good long time. That's the way I see that. Now, there's a question of probation and a question of parole. Let me tell you about a fellow who wouldn't take parole. There's 2 of them, really. G. Gordon Liddy is one, and here again I'm not going to tout Mr. Liddy, and I'm not going to tell you he's good, bad, or indifferent. I'll let you make that determination. All I know is what I see. And I see that he spent 4 years in jail over an issue that he felt that he was right concerning that issue, and that when he went to jail, he had an opportunity to come out on parole, but he said, no, I will not do that. To come out on parole is to capitulate to your captors. You're saying, yes, I'll sign this parole agreement. I will waive my 4th and my 5th Amendment rights. I will sign this contract and waive my rights, and I will allow you to do with me whatever you will. I will become your slave. I don't believe that a free man can do that. If you do get sentenced to jail, And I know this is going to be tough, because when you're sitting here and the judge says to you, well, I could give you a withheld judgment, and if I grant you probation, I'll put you on probation for 2 years, and if you'll agree to that, I won't put you in jail. Now, what are you going to do? Well, I guess you'll have to make your own decision, but as for me, I don't think I can accept parole or probation. Liddy didn't, and he stayed the full 4 years, and when he came out a free man. He went in a free man and he came out a free man, and he never knuckled under to the tyrants at any time, to my knowledge. And I really admire a man that will be of the Sergeant York variety. I don't know if he's a righteous man. All I know is he must be tough as nails, because he stayed the full 4 years. The rest of the Watergate burglars capitulated and came out on parole and probation, or probation. Let's take a look at another one. I think there's a fellow named Von Ellsworth or something on that order in the 1960s. And I think he was a tax protester, at least he was branded as so, and I think he was sentenced to 4 years in jail, as I've heard the story said, and it may or may not be accurate, so if you know more facts than I do, please disregard the inaccuracies, but nevertheless, the general gist of the story goes that he was in jail for something like 2 years, or let's say a year and a half or something like that, and they came to him. He was in jail busily teaching the income tax issue to all the prisoners. He's in jail teaching the tax strike movement to anybody that wants to listen. He's just doing his thing in life. Hi, Joe. And pretty soon, I guess they decided that, gosh, this is really counterproductive. Why, we've got an instructor and a teacher here in the jail teaching rebellion against the established authorities. Well, let's offer him parole or probation. And so they offered him parole, and he said, why don't you stick it where there's no sunlight? And they kept him another 3 or 4 months, and pretty soon it got so bad they just said, get out of here, and they threw him out of jail. That's right, they just literally threw him right out. You know, that's what happened to this fellow Claude. He was in there for 42 days of a 6-month sentence, and they just walked in and threw him out. For the 42 days that he was in there, he was selling Barrister's Inn of Boise, Idaho. He was talking to the prisoners in there about their rights and beginning to teach those people that they had rights. And pretty soon it became so counterproductive to them that they threw him out. And I sit here and I say, well, I don't know if that's going to work in your case every time. All I know is that when they put me in the penitentiary, I'm not going to sit here and be a nasty guy and a bad guy. The example of Joseph, when he was thrown in the Egyptian Pharaoh's dungeon, he was well liked by all of the jailers. When Peter was thrown in jail, and this angel came along and broke the jail down or whatever it was, Peter stayed there. The jailer was about to kill himself, because if the prisoners escaped, they'd kill the jailer. And so Peter said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll stick around. That so won't kill you. You can imagine how grateful that jailer was. All right? So we note then that when you're put in jail, if you cooperate and you're a nice guy, but you stick with your religious principles and you stick with your rights, you show yourself a man of character or a woman of character who is not going to serve these strange gods, and you're not going to bow down to their tyranny. But you're also not a criminal. You're not a wicked and evil person with wicked and criminal intent in any regard. All right? Now, there's a couple of other more drastic or more direct methods for also gaining victory and gaining either tactical or ultimately total victory. Now, if you'll notice over in Ireland, and I've contended for a long time that there's two problems in Ireland and Poland. You see those two countries in the news constantly. You know, if there was 300 righteous men up there in North Ireland, it seems like to me they'd just throw the British out. If there was 300 righteous men over in Poland, it seems like to me that they would throw the Russians out. So what it tells me is that either there aren't 300 righteous men over there, or there's some other problem that we don't know about. But I noticed a tactic that was used in North Ireland, and that was the fasting tactic. Now, it's my understanding through the grapevine that while the press has told us that those people all died in vain, it was my understanding that they got every single one of those political concessions that they demanded. 5 of them died, as I recall. 5 of them starved to death, and they got what they wanted. All right, now let's apply that to where we are. I think that some of you out there may know how to fast. And I know that to some of those of you out there who don't know how, this may sound a little strange and bizarre. We know that these people fasted, in this one case, 63 days before he died. Now, I'm assuming that he was drinking water at the same time. A man who does not eat and does not drink could probably fast 14 days if he didn't dehydrate. Now, let's suppose you were put in jail, and let's suppose you didn't eat or drink until you became so weak you couldn't get out of bed. What would they do next? How do you handle a person who's in jail for no crime, or for a misdemeanor, or some rinky-dink charge? I mean, after all, these guys, Bobby Sands and some of these guys in North Ireland, they're in jail for murder, and they're in jail, you know, for life. What do you do with a citizen or a housewife here who hasn't committed any crime? They just won't fill out the form, or they just won't go buy a driver's license or something like that. And you put this fellow in jail, and he's in jail here for a week, and in a week's time you don't eat. Well, there's a certain amount of pain, and I'm sure that there's a certain number of you that would say, well, this is absolutely impossible. But I'm not saying everybody has to do this. I'm just saying, what if? And there's probably some of you that may use this tactic, and it may work very nicely for you. You don't eat for a week. Well, now what are they going to do? Let you die? Wouldn't that look kind of bad if you just died in jail, you know? Joe Smoley dies in the Ada County Jail of starvation. I don't think that your public officials are prepared for that. So I think that they would take you out for psychiatric evaluation. Now you come up to a psychiatrist and say, oh gosh, hi Joe, how are you doing? Gee, just doing great, you know. Go through the test. Gosh, yeah, I can put this piece of paper in this book, and yeah, I can put this piece of paper over here. Why won't you eat? Oh, that's a religious issue, and I don't think I want to sit here and talk to you about my religion. Let's talk about politics and taxes and law and things like that. Let's leave religion out of it. Or you're saying then that you're not eating for religious reasons. I didn't say, sir, but I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about other things. How's your wife? How's the kids? Are you happy doing what you're doing? How did you happen to become a psychiatrist? Did you go to college? Where? When? How long? I mean, you can change the subject. Now, what's going to happen? The guy's going to say, well, yeah, the guy's sane. Well, now they've got to take you to a hospital, strap you down, and give you IVs. Well, what happens if you reach over and you pull it out and throw it away? Well, now they've got to tie you up so that you can't take it out, right? Well, are they going to do this for the rest of your life? Are they going to keep you strapped down in a hospital? And do you know what hospitals cost? Do you have any idea what it's going to cost the county to take you over here to a hospital and force feed you with IVs? Well, so they do it once. You're in there for 3 days. And now they bring you back to the county jail. Okay. Now you won't eat. Now another week goes by. Now you're so weak you can't get out of bed. You can't function. And they take you to, well, remember what Mahatma Gandhi said? I think that you people will see the wisdom of just giving up on me. Now, I don't know how long they'll do that, but I don't believe for a moment that they're going to let you die. And I don't believe for a moment that they're going to let you go to the hospital more than twice. But let's suppose that they take you there a second time. Well, will they do it a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, a 10th time, a 20th time? Sometime, friend, between 1 and 20, they're going to give up. And when they give up, you win. And when you win, you come right back out and you file that massive Title 42 suit against all of those people who have oppressed you and deprived you of your rights. And you may win, or you may lose. But it doesn't make any difference whether you win or lose. It's heads, I win $500,000, and tails, you lose $20,000. And I just don't think that Ada County, Idaho has that much money. And furthermore, I don't think they can deal with us. There comes a point in time when they have to go to Elmer's and they have to sit down with me over coffee, or they have to kill me. And I think that it's so much easier and so much cheaper and so much more intelligent to go to Elmer's and sit down with me and say, all right, Gordon, what is it you want? I want my freedom. I want you people to obey the law. I want you people to obey Miranda at page 491 and Miranda at page 480 and Davis versus Mississippi. I want you to obey Powell versus Alabama and Zerbst versus California. I want you people to obey Idaho Code 49 and Idaho Code 19. And I want you to stop oppressing me, and I want you to stop oppressing other citizens. That's right. Now, there's another tactic that comes along with this, or there's another fallout benefit that comes along with this. Have you ever noticed that politicians usually lose their power and their authority if they're unable to deal with a particular circumstance? Now, I want to bring your attention now to the State Tax Commission here in Idaho, and let's think about it for a moment. There's a man in there, and he has a job, and he has a certain responsibility and duty now, doesn't he? And in order for him to excel, in order for him to become promoted to the next level up, he has to collect so much tax. He has to do so much in the way of work. And the fellow who's really going to get noticed is the bureaucrat who can go in, get the job done, have no notoriety or adverse publicity, and they'll say, hey, man, you can steal more money than anybody we've ever had in this job before. We're going to move you up here to a higher level of theft and power. And then he gets to that level of theft and power, and then they say, well, gosh, you've done such a good job here, we're going to elevate you to the next level. What happens if the man fails in his job? What happens if he goes out to a certain area and he tries to get 12 citizens down there to comply with the law, and instead of that, he gets 12 citizens locked up in the Caribou County Jail? And the Caribou County Jail's only got 4 beds. At least that's what I've heard. So now you got to send them up to Pocatello, right? And if you get 12 of those citizens at $16 a head, and remember I've told you, money is the name of the game. These people are collecting taxes. And they know that if they spend $1 million in collection activity, that they can collect $3 million. What we must do is that for every dollar they spend on collection, it costs 10. You see how that works? That's where you get the most bang for the buck. Every time it costs them $10 to collect $1. Or in the case of Rick, I think whatever it is they're going to spend, they're going to collect absolutely nothing. And I think that in my case, they'll probably collect little or nothing. I'm in hopes that those people down in southeastern Idaho, when it's all said and done, they collect absolutely nothing. Now, the message that sends to the rest of the bureaucrats is that when this bureaucrat is demoted or fired for his failures, the other bureaucrats doesn't take them very long to figure out, wait a minute, whatever it is old Joe was doing didn't get him promoted. He took these crazy people on, these people that had character, these Sergeant Yorks, and he got shot down, so therefore we'll be a little smarter. And what they'll do is when they see you or 10 or 12 like you, they'll ignore you like you've got the bubonic plague. You won't be able to get them any closer to you than you could if you had AIDS. And when you get to that point in time, you're winning victories and you don't even know you're in the battle. But do you see what happens when we have too many weak people in the fight? You know, you get 12 of them over here, and of the 12, 6 of them capitulate, and 6 of them go to jail, and of the 6 that go to jail, 3 finally capitulate, and of the 3 that went to jail, they got in a fight with the jail guard over there or broke some other law, and so they dropped the tax issue and prosecute you for something else, and they've succeeded in winning 12 out of 12, and there's 12 defeats. You know, one of the things that I've noticed that these cowards will tend to do, I remember one time I was down at a way station, and the issue was over whether or not we would open our truck without a Fourth Amendment warrant. And so I was rather adamant, and I said, I'll be very happy to open that truck just as soon as you produce a lawful Fourth Amendment warrant signed by a judge. Now get a warrant. and we'll open that truck and you can see what's in it. But if you don't get a warrant, then you're not going to look in that truck, and if you do, if you break into my truck, I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. Now, do you understand my position, sir? And this guy must have been an old Marine sergeant, you see, and he wasn't an old man. You know, he's probably a very nice guy, and he's probably got a wife and 3 kids and a dog and a patch of grass and a mortgage just like all the rest of us. And this guy got his nose about this close to my nose. I mean, it was about like that. And he barked an order at me, "You get that key out and you open that truck!" And he looked at me, you know, just about as nasty and about as mean as anybody could be. And I'll tell you what really had me worried, there was about 6 of these guys. They weren't as big as this big guy, but, you know, I'm 6 foot, and I had to look up when I was looking into his eyeballs. And so in a circumstance like that, I recognized immediately that I had a problem. Number one, this guy was looking for a fight, and if I so much as scraped his shirt accidentally, he would beat me half to death. So I carefully put my hands behind my back. I had one witness with me. He stood off to the side, and I looked right up into his big brown eyes, and I said, "Sir, I'm demanding all of my rights at all times, and if you violate any of my rights for any cause or reason, I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law, and I'm demanding that you obey the law." And he stared at me for a full 20 seconds as I looked into his big brown eyes, and I stared right back. And one of his fellows came over and put his arm on him, and he said, whatever his name was, "Joe, let's go inside." He was so mad, he was trying to get me to push him or to touch him in some way so that he could kill me. When I say that figuratively, I don't think he'd physically kill me. I think he'd have just beat me to about that close to death, see? Now, you've got to watch that. And you've got to watch when you're put in jail that they will do everything in their power to tempt you, to harass you, and to intimidate you. They will try to get you to break the rules so that they can write you up. We have a fellow now who's on parole. No, he's on probation, excuse me. No, it's not even that yet. He's about to get probation, and he's been sentenced to 120 days. And during that 120-day workout period, these people hassle and harass him, and if they can get him to break the rules, I mean to stay on the telephone for 22 minutes instead of 20, which is the limit. If they can get him to leave his job, you know, for an hour that's unauthorized while he goes to lunch, they will have people come to him and offer him a marijuana cigarette, who's really not a fellow prisoner but an undercover agent who's attempting to get him to break the rules in any way they can so that they can sentence him to the penitentiary. That's the thing that you've got to be aware of, and you've got to be just a little smarter than the average tyrant. Now, once you've heard and once you've known or somebody said, okay, now watch out for that, see, I have a problem here. I'm not going to allow them to bait me into some kind of a confrontation wherein they can then use that as the excuse to kill me. When they do that, I want it to be murder, pure and simple. I want it to be plain and simple and easy for everyone to understand. Now, I'm counting on the fact, based upon Job here, we hope Job is correct, they can't touch me without God's permission. Now, if that's true, then I'm safe. Now, when and if they do get God's permission, well, then I guess I'm just down the tubes and there's no hope for me. But I think that if God claims that He knows when every sparrow falls out of the sky, and I don't know whether that's an allegory or not, and I'll leave that for you to figure out, but the way I've got it figured, He might know that I'm around. I do carry a pretty high profile. And those of us that are in this work are in a pretty high profile, and He might just have somebody that knows that you're around. The question as to whether or not you're a righteous man or not would depend upon whether or not you keep those 10 commandments. That's why when I'm out in the battlefield, the people that we surround ourselves with here at our local school, we try to keep within the bounds of propriety. I'm probably the worst of all of them. There are some fairly good men that we have here. And I think that you, wherever you are, should surround yourself with the same kind of people, the same kind of character. I mean people that you can depend on in the clutch. People that are not going to fold up like a daisy in the hot sun. People that can go the entire course. A man who goes to jail and sits out there for 12 or 14 days and knows that he's liable to be there for 2 or 3 or 6 months or a year needs to know that he can count on me and count on Bob and count on those that are behind him. You know, I don't want to go to jail if I don't have people I can count on. But in the 2 or 3 times that I have been locked up out there for a week and once in solitary confinement, I knew that my fellows were behind me, and I knew that they were filing writs of habeas corpus, and I knew that they were taking care of my court work. Rick knows that we are taking care of his court work. We are doing that writing for him. And you need to have that kind of assurance behind you also. Now we come to this item here where I say, don't interfere with others. You know, there's a lot of groups working, and a lot of them don't know as much as you know, or they don't know as much as I know. Well, just because they don't know as much or they're not performing to the same standards is no reason to run them down. And I'd like to be cautious about running our other fellows down. Groups over here in this part of the state, and a group over in this part, and a guy down here. Privately, we may say to ourselves, I don't think that this kind of strategy or technique will work. Why don't we suggest to them that they do this? Or why don't we suggest to them that they do that? Why don't we see if we can't help them to get to a higher level of expertise? We've helped a number of groups across the country. To this moment in time, there are 17 schools operating nationwide. I don't know how many people are involved in those schools, and I don't really care. All I know is there are 17 out there now, and those 17, if there's 10 in each one, that means there's 170, and that's a little over half, that 300. When you start getting 200 or 300 good, qualified, knowledgeable pro se citizen litigants in that courtroom, you're going to find in whatever county, whatever state, that the judges will sit up and take notes. I was in court yesterday, and of course, while I was there, I couldn't take many notes, but I notice now when I go into the courtroom that usually 4 or 5 attorneys will come in to listen to the proceedings. Around here, that's somewhat unusual. One of the fellows that was with me yesterday said that one adverse attorney in there, no, it wasn't an adverse, he was a neutral attorney, took 2 pages of notes trying to figure out where we're coming from and what we're doing. Well, that's good, because there's one more man who's been exposed to another citizen who says, I want my rights, and I want my grand jury, and I want to know why it is that we're not having our grand juries here in Idaho. And I'm going to talk about grand juries, and when I'm dead and buried, there are going to be other citizens talking about grand juries until it is cheaper and more expedient to convene a grand jury than it is to mess with one of us without one. Now, the British in India were only there for one reason, and that was to make profit. And since their endeavor was to make profit, that government came to a conclusion that when it became costly for them to maintain their presence in India, they got out of India. They left, just like Gandhi said they would, because of the wisdom that they could develop for themselves. We've determined that because you Indians are now qualified to rule yourself, because we came over here and taught you government and built railroads for you and did all these great and wonderful things for you, that it's for that reason that we, the great and magnanimous English, are going to leave and give you self-government. As if India was some kind of a trading colony like Rhode Island or Massachusetts that was created and carved by the English. The word India is mentioned twice in Scripture. India was there in the time of Esther and Nehemiah 800 years before Christ. That's 800 years before Christ. My goodness, the English didn't even get to India until about 1700, did they? Well, how did those Indians over there rule themselves in 800 BC or in 300 BC or in 900 AD? Somehow or another they were getting by before the English got there. The English got there because there was profits to be made and a weakness to be exploited. And the reason that our courts, and the reason that our public servants, and the reason that our police exploit us is because there's a profit to be made. Because the law enforcement growth industry makes money at that. And as soon as we take the money and the profit out of it, they'll stop doing it. They might stop doing it for a host of other reasons, and if you've got some other angle, well then fine, that may be good for you. What I'm saying here is, in Ada County, Idaho, it will become so expensive for the government to oppress us that they're going to have to stop. So when we take a look at these examples of Scripture, and here again, which I say is I'm not a prophet because, I think I've mentioned the story before. I used to be a prophet. And then I prophesied that the temple would be built in Jerusalem by 1972 and that the second coming of Christ would occur in 1975. And I kind of thought that the tribulation would begin about 1972 or so. And here it is, 1983, and there's one thing that we did find out, that none of those prophecies came to pass. And so I took another look over here, and I think it was about Deuteronomy 8, and it said that if a prophet come to you and he prophesies and his prophecies don't come to pass, you will know that I didn't send him. Okay? Well, now, we don't know what I am, but we do know what I am not. And we know I'm not a prophet. But I think that I'm smart enough, and I think that most of you out there are smart enough to look into Scripture and say to yourselves, now wait a minute. If these examples of ancient history, these examples of other people who refused to knuckle under to tyranny, and as I did here, I went back to 1200 B.C. in the time of Gideon, and I brought it up to a fellow named Claude Potts and a guy named Rick in 1983. And I've showed you here 2 or 3 examples of where, in my own case, when I came up the 3rd time, will you continue to put me in jail for my religious beliefs? And the judge says, no, I guess it's time to give up and quit. And in the case of Potts, how long will you keep me in jail? 42 days. And in the case of Rick, we don't know yet. But I'm willing to bet that since he's only 26 and we estimate his lifespan of at least another 50 years, that sometime between today and 50 years from now, Mr. Rick will be let out of jail. I don't believe for a minute that he's going to spend the rest of his life in the Ada County jail. All right, now based upon some of these examples that we've given you in this lesson, and I know that some of them may sound a little wild, but if you'll apply these lessons when you go to jail, when that sentencing comes down, if you're the type of person that has this kind of character, that Sergeant York kind of tenacity, that kind of righteous man that can chase 10 or chase 100, and not the kind of person that we have to send back because you're timid, or because, well, I'm a little weak and I can't do this. And I'll concede right away, my wife doesn't do this, and she's a fine woman, she's a fine lady. But she can't do this, and so we leave her home. But for those men and women that can do this, we'd like to welcome you aboard, and we want you to help us turn the ship of state around and to reestablish our rights on that courtroom floor and our freedoms in our Constitution. And there isn't a reason in the world why 300 good righteous men can't accomplish that.